Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva requested an impeachment process against current President Jair Bolsonaro. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden was perceived as the winner of the final debate with Donald Trump on Thursday night. Nigerian president called for understanding and peace, while some local officials have opted to install curfews to contain the violence in the country. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Laura Palmeiro. Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva requested an impeachment process against current President Jair Bolsonaro for refusing to purchase COVID-19 vaccines from China. Lula justified the request in the face of what he considers an irresponsibility. He stressed that a leader should provide his people with the vaccine against the new COVID-19, although he himself might not believe in its efficacy. He remarked that the current Health Minister Eduardo Pazuello committed himself at the governor's meeting to acquire 46 million doses from the Bhutan Institute in China to contain the spread of the virus. Refusing to implement preventive measures for his country, his fair cause for his removal, claimed the Brazilian leader. Currently, Brazil has over 5 million cases and 155,000 deaths due to COVID-19. The International Monetary Fund could renegotiate with the Argentinian government and thus help solve the crisis inherited from the government of Mauricio Macri. This was announced by the fund's head of department for the Western Hemisphere, Alejandro Werner, who stressed the credit issuing organization will support those plans introduced by the Argentinian authorities to return economic stability to the country. The Argentinian government would be seeking a new financing package which will allow to pay back the $44 billion mega credit, which allowed them to open new horizons after Mauricio Macri left the power. In Costa Rica, the National Rescue Movement called for new reforms and protests and affirmed that no road blockade belongs to or is promoted by this movement. The National Rescue Movement affirmed that their struggle is peaceful. On September 17, the Costa Rican government submitted a proposal to receive a $1.7 billion credit from the International Monetary Fund so as to cover government budget balance, full of new taxes and sale of public entities, which was unanimously rejected by all sectors and political parties.
A los contrabandos que a diario meten, a las exoneraciones que les dan, que son tan bondadosas las que hasta los muertos.
Barbados Minister of Tourism, Senator Lisa Cummins, informed that the British media personnel that the country is open for business and that health and safety protocols for COVID-19 will be followed. Senator Cummins, who thanked the British Airways for resuming flights to the island, said it was important for visitors to know the country was open for travel, with the highest level of health security being in place. Cummins underlined the government's commitment with COVID-19 protocols, but also added that the relationship between the island and visitors has been built on trust.
Employees who had been laid off and to retain 103 workers required for the continued operations of LIAT. C4 assured employees that the company will honor severance.
In St. Lucia, a former health minister has called authorities to close the country's borders and quarantine the community of Ox-Leon in Dinari in the battle to control the spread of COVID-19. Dr. Keith Mondesir spoke shortly before the medical officer, Dr. Sharon Balman-George, announced 3 new COVID-19 cases. He expressed his concern because St. Lucia has limited resources to deal with the worsening COVID-19 situation, and people on the whole do not have massive homes in which they can observe social distancing. The island's borders should be closed, he affirmed. He also observed that St. Lucia is currently accommodating tourists from Europe and North America inside the country.
The citizens from the city at the heart of the outbreak. As of Wednesday, there were 6,061 confirmed cases of the virus
And the United States government has imposed coercive measures and an economic, commercial, and financial blockade against Cuba for almost 60 years, with the objective of stifling the economic growth of the country and sparking unrest among its population. Our correspondent Nayara Tardo has more in the following report.
Cubans stress that over the last 7 months they have to deal with two pandemics, one for which no one in the world was prepared, COVID-19, while the other has been maintained for almost 60 years against the people of the island. The economic, commercial and financial blockade imposed by the United States. It is a policy that has been tightened under the Trump administration, even in the context of the pandemic crisis, and that aims to struggle the Caribbean islands' economy, to provoke social unrest and regime change.
And this is what they want, so that people here feel bad, take to the streets to protest as they do in other countries. They tighten a policy to achieve that. What he's seeking is to win the elections.
Everything they do is to prevent the economy from receiving money, so people think we are starving here. But we Cubans are strong, and we will always come through. Santiago Perez has been studying international policy issues and especially U.S.-Cuba relations for over 20 years. He assures U.S. that the growing hostility from the White House in the midst of the pandemic ceased to increase the negative impact of the blockade, increase the scarcities and inflict further suffering on the Cuban people.
This administration has adopted over 200 measures against Cuba during the COVID pandemic. They reached the conclusion that they had to increase the pressure against our country, which coincides with an electoral campaign. So you have this cisterns union between Trump's re-election interests in Florida and the worst sectors of the anti-Cuban mafia in the United States.
Since the first cases of COVID-19 were reported in Cuba, the White House has unleashed a campaign against all those who have strived to send aid to Cuba to confront the virus. Several companies which supplied ventilators reported that they had to stop sales to the Medicuba company after having been bought out by American firms. Likewise, Chinese company Alibaba was threatened for delivering medical supplies to the Caribbean country, and the ships entrusted with its cargo were forbidden entry to U.S. ports.
This rhetorical nonsense of the U.S. administration when they say they want to help the Cuban people is a sheer fallacy. In the midst of such a complex situation as this, what they have done is tighten the pressure. Close to 40 new measures against Cuba have been adopted during this period. They have prevented donations from reaching the Cuban people. As in the case of Alibaba, they have prevented potential purchases of medical materials for our people, both in the United States and through financial transactions.
The Trump administration has represented a step back in U.S.-Cuba relations. Every year, Cuba presents a resolution calling for the end of this U.S. unilateral policy against the Cuban people before the United Nations General Assembly. The Cuban government has made it clear to the international community that it will not cease in its endeavors to put an end to these measures which violate the human rights of its people.
Nayara Tardo, TeleSUR, La Habana.
Thank you, Nayara. And we'll be right back after this, a very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden was received as the winner of the final debate with Donald Trump on Thursday night, according to a CNN poll of debate viewers and a panel of undecided North Carolina voters. Trump, who remains behind in the polls, tried to appeal with more moderate Republican supporters. The debate was seen by the voters as more presidential and informative than the chaotic previous clash last month in Cleveland. Candidates clashed over the COVID-19 handling, and Trump blamed China again for the spreading of the virus. And Biden repeated that the current president does not have a plan on how to handle the disease when the winter is approaching. On foreign policy, the contenders accused each other of corruption, and Trump wanted to highlight unverified reports that Biden's son Hunter was using his father's influence to benefit himself and the Biden family. On the other hand, the Democrat candidate was eager to talk about the secret bank account that the president has kept in China. The presidential elections will be held on November 3rd, although a record of 47 million Americans have already chosen early voting, an alternative that Trump has described as a fraud. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said Friday that the United States should stop dragging China into its election campaigns after U.S. President Trump criticized China's environment situation.
You've all just come from the outside, and I don't know if you've noticed or not, the sky is blue today. We are not interested in U.S. elections. We also hope the U.S. can stop dragging China into its election campaigns. The remarks made by the United States officials are full of Cold War mentality and hegemonic thinking, fully exposes the U.S.'s consistent practice of wanton interference in other countries' internal affairs and of forcing small and medium-sized countries to choose sides.
Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said on Friday that the real number of coronavirus cases in Spain is more than 3 million already.
Institution with scientific experts at the head show that the real number of people that have been infected with COVID-19 in our country is more than 3 million.
The Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez also stated that the country will take all measures that are necessary to reduce the number of infections to 25 cases per 100,000 inhabitants.
This week we reached the official record of 1 million cases, but the zero prevalence studies carried out by public institutions with scientific experts at the head show that the real number of people that have been infected with COVID-19 in our country is more than 3 million.
The European Commission announced on Friday that it will make available 100 million euros to secure between 15 and 22 million rapid antigen tests for the coronavirus.
So we need a large number of rapid antigen tests right now, and therefore the European Commission is making available 100 million euro from our emergency support instrument. With this money, we can buy between 15 and 22 million rapid antigen tests for the European Union. This will cover our immediate needs. And in parallel, we can also launch a joint procurement to enable the European countries to buy more rapid antigen tests themselves. This should help us to slow down the spread of the virus. We are in this together.
Germany's Disease Control Center says the number of new daily coronavirus cases remains near a record high as the pandemic continues to spread in the country. The Robert Koch Institute said on Friday that 11,242 new cases were reported over the last 24-hour period, just shy of the record 11,278 mark set the day before. The nationwide infection rate over the last 7 days rose to 60.3 per 100,000 residents, up from 56.2 the day before. Some hotspots like the capital are much higher than that, with Berlin reporting a rate of 110.6 cases per 100,000 residents.
On the situation in the pandemic, I think we all say that every day we look at the figures. We continue to see a rapid increase in new infections in Germany, and we must therefore do more than ever to prevent the virus from spreading uncontrollably. Unfortunately, there are not just a few, but a whole series of cities and municipalities where the infection rates are so high and have risen so rapidly that the health authorities there can no longer do what is actually the desired goal, namely to trace contacts in every single case of infection, to notify people to ask people to be tested.
Belgian authorities announced additional measures to battle a second wave of COVID-19 cases threatening to swamp hospitals.
Why we will adopt more restrictive measures in the fields of culture, sport, youth, amusement parks, and higher education. We are pressing the pause button for a reason, and our objective is to ensure that our GPS and hospitals can continue to do their work, that our children can continue to go to school, that our businesses can continue to operate, and that we preserve the mental well-being of our population as much as possible. Between now and Monday, November 2nd, we are asking hospitals to increase the number of beds available in intensive care for COVID patients to 1,200 beds. More restrictive measures in the fields of culture, sport.
With 620 confirmed COVID-19 cases per 100,000 people, Belgium is behind the Czech Republic among EU member states in terms of the scale of the pandemic. Today, the nation of 11.5 million people has recorded over 270,000 cases of infection and more than 10,000 deaths. Hospitals which rode out a first wave of the virus successfully in March and April are now close to being overwhelmed, with 500 new severe cases by a day needing inpatient treatment. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Nigerian President Mahmoud Buhari, after regretting the loss of life during recent protests against police brutality, called for understanding and peace, while some local officials have opted to install curfews to contain the violence and prevent the pandemic from spreading out of control. However, the protesters have not abandoned the streets to government's gestures such as dismantling of the police unit charged with excesses and the requests from the African Union calling for a dialogue and respect have not been able to curtail the predominantly peaceful demonstrations. The government has acknowledged mortal victims due to police action during the control of violent protests without providing exact figures, while some human rights organizations have reported that since October 8, 56 people might have lost their lives. The Delta State governor in the south of the country, Ifenyaka Ikanowa, has decreed a 48-hour curfew as this on Friday and the closing of the schools until November 2nd. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad presented this Thursday a general budget draft bill for the year 2021 to the People's Council. With this action, the floor is set for the People's Council, top decision-making body in the Arab nation, to approve the necessary resources for the government to continue the rebuilding process in the country. It may be pointed out that this past Tuesday, the project had been passed in the cabinet meeting for a total of 8.5 billion Syrian liras. This Friday, Libya's two rival factions signed a permanent ceasefire agreement after 5 days of talks at the United Nations. The international organization hailed the move as a moment that will go down in history. The UN's envoy to Libya, Stephanie Williams, said that today is a good day for the Libyan people. Williams added that both parties agreed to return all military units and armed groups on the front lines to their camps, along with the departure of all mercenaries and foreign fighters from all Libyan territories. Both parties also agreed to establish a mechanism to monitor jointly with the UN mission to the implementation of the ceasefire agreement. However, both sides continue to accuse each other of supporting terrorist groups. The ceasefire does not apply to UN-designated terrorist groups.
This agreement will be, God willing, the main reason to stop the bloodshed and the armed conflict in Libya, and it will be, God willing, the reason to restore security and stability on the entire Libyan soil. My message to all Libyans is to be one hand in building Libya in order for it to be a state of security and stability. We have no objection to cooperating with other countries, whether militarily or politically, for construction. We are happy with what we have accomplished, and I thank the UN mission for its effort, and with God's permission, we will implement these decisions that we have agreed upon.
And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Friday said Moscow had been following the development of the political situation in Kyrgyzstan with concern. Kazbakiev noted that Russia contributed to the stabilization of the political situation in Kyrgyzstan after parliamentary elections and thanked Lavrov. Kyrgyzstan, a country of 6.5 million people located in the border with China, plunged into chaos last week after mass protests erupted the day after a parliamentary election appeared to show parties connected to the ruling elite winning.
We follow with concern the development of the political situation, and we acknowledge with satisfaction that they moved towards tranquility. Using this occasion, I would like to thank the government of the Russian Federation, to thank you personally, Sergei Viktorovich, for the special contribution to the stabilization of the political situation in Kyrgyzstan at post-election crisis time.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Remember to join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Laura Palmeiro. Thank you for watching.